But they do need money. I mean, this was one of the the FBAR penalties when they first started going after expats in the OVDP program in 2009 were unbelievable. Like minnows, people that owed less than, I think it was $1,500 of tax were being fined 129% of the tax that they owed.
But,
I mean, you can't rationalize it.
But United States government is, what is that, about over $15 trillion in debt right now?
16 trillion, it's
yeah,
upwards
16,
of that.
15, 16. How much of that he can collect out of that?
That's ridiculous. It would run the government for 2 hours.
I mean, the amount of the manpower they have to put for this and the amount of the resources that they have to allocate to go out to every country to negotiate, go through the process of the negotiation. It's just creating like
That's a mess.
It's like digging the ground every day in the street. They're creating job for themselves.
There's no possibility that this is about taxation. None at all.
Not really.
But on the other hand, you said there was no master plan. In the last few months, I've been studying the relationship between the private sector and the government sector.
Mm-hmm.
And often what happens is that people who work for the government will give benefits to the private sector, to corporations and that sort of thing, so that afterwards when they leave their government job, they can get a six-figure salary.
Oh, we have it in Canada. I wrote something.
So
they always have better job, better pay, less responsibility after they leave the office.
Yeah, and it's a revolving door between the government and the private sector. Well, we
especially the IRS door, incidentally.
Yeah.
IRS what?
Treasury and the private sector.
We have to consider that the tax compliance industry is a very powerful lobby in the United States. And they spend something like $1 million a month lobbying Congress in order to get their
like accountant here when it comes to the election laws. Yes.
Yeah, and
they do the same thing
and
here.
So one of the rationales, therefore, for FATCA is that it makes a lot of people very wealthy, and therefore,
but at the same token, make a lot of people very poor too.
Well, that's how they do it.
I mean, it's not. There is always two face to each coin. I mean, you cannot just.
Of course.
So, if you want to know, there's a really good example of this in. Well, am I allowed to say the 30-year vet's
No.
IRS vet's name?
No.
Well, there was a guy who used to comment at the Isaac Brock Society. He called himself 30-year IRS vet. He worked 30 years for the IRS, got himself a nice IRS pension when he retired, and then he moved right into the FATCA compliance industry.
To open an office and
now
help
he helps people get into compliance.
It's like cops when they finish the they go and open an office. Okay, now we tell you how to dodge your tickets.
Yes.
Well, this is
Although
even better.
the difference is they're not helping anyone dodge anything.
No, what I'm saying is knowing inside trade and using that inside trade for personal gain. It has been around for.
You know, the going rate for a 30-year IRS vet is $700 an hour.
Well, of course. Yeah. It's better than lawyers, by the way.
He is a lawyer.
He is a lawyer.
Oh well, then he charged double.
Well, better than some lawyers. You know, perhaps worse than others. But part of the issue here is, of course, the utter complexity of these laws. They cannot be understood by people unless they're specialists in this area. The cost of tax compliance for people who are affected by this is prohibitive. There's no question that this has to go, because if it doesn't go, it's reached the point where no person deemed to be a U.S. citizen living outside the United States will be able to survive anymore. But I would go further. U.S. tax law is so complex and so expensive to comply with that the same is true of Americans inside the United States. It is astonishing that from a U.S.-centric worldview, they see the threat to the country as outside the United States. The truth is, the single biggest threat to the United States is the Internal Revenue Code, the complexity of it.
It is 70,000 pages.
Well, I believe you. A few years back, we were talking about the issue of the taxation, and even in Canada, no individual could possibly understand and know everything about just, let's say, income tax,
Oh, God.
because they keep adding and adding year after
complicated.
year.
Well,
They-
it's more than adding, it's what they add, right? I mean, the tax legislation, because of its complexity, and I think the United States in particular, because of the way laws are made, you know, where you change a law as part of a broader bill that has nothing whatsoever to do with it, has gotten to be an area where, you know, your local congressman can reward somebody, you know, or damage somebody, or something like that. There's a fascinating book. I do not know this person, but I think this book is so fantastic that I'll do a shout out for this book. It's called Good and Evil: Taxes and Civilization by Charles W. Adams. It's an absolutely incredible book that actually it's a history of the world in terms of tax, right, and demonstrating how tax regulations, complexity, etc., you know, has actually destroyed countries. And the U.S. will be destroyed, not externally, but by the sheer bureaucracy in the place. 50 states, each legislative factories, pumping out new laws 24/7, and the federal government, the regulation. It has reached the point where I do not believe there is a single American living inside the United States who is not in violation of any of a
Something.
number of laws at any given point.
Well, maybe they want to have a guilt trip inside again. It comes back to the inception. When you are you feel guilty, you are fearful.
In the 80s, New
Exactly.
Zealand. In the 80s,
Exactly.
New Zealand was drowning under the bureaucracy. There's an interesting book, Roger Douglas' Unfinished Business. What they did was they changed the tax code. They
To
simplified
that one
it.
one
The
page, two
economy
page.
turned around miraculously.
Yes, it has been even discussed in Canada for quite some time, but they are not willing to do that. And I think if they personally, it is my personal opinion, I think if the water is muddier, they can catch more fish. It is the reason they keep it that way. They want to be
Oh.
convoluted, because if you have all sorts of things, you never know where the money goes.
Well, there's definitely something wrong with a society where before doing anything, the first thing you have to do is call a tax lawyer. Of course, with American citizenship, it's even worse. I mean, by definition, an American citizen is somebody who has to have a lawyer with them 24/7. In fact,
Yes.
every family should have their own family
And funny
lawyer.
thing is, I don't know about United States, but even here in Canada, when you call CRA, if your question is more than just simple line, what do I put there, they say, go and get an accountant.
Well, that's because they have various gradations of people. The people that answer the phones on the front are
No,
not
what I'm
tax
saying is
folks.
the institution who collects tax is not willing to help you to pay them.
Well, okay, I guess.
There is another question that was, how can a married couple, where one is a U.S. person and the other isn't, maintain a joint bank account so that the non-U.S. spouse isn't risking his money or her money through penalties or IRS
This,
audit?
can't.
this is
You
it.
can't.
There's no way to.
So it's because it's diluted.
Well, that's
Because
why.
The reporting requirements are such that the account held with the non-U.S., aka in their terminology, alien
Aliens.
spouse.
alien spouse.
Yeah,
Aliens.
yeah, alien
Maybe it's
spouse.
like lizard people can.
Reptilian.
Are required to report the complete account balance, and it's actually a very serious problem.
Well,
I
that's
mean,
why
there are
I
a number of
renounced.
people who renounce citizenship for that reason alone. But the answer is you can't.
You cannot protect the other
Yeah.
person.
We call it
Peter?
the F-bar
We both did it.
marriage.
Yes, I relinquished my U.S. citizenship for that reason. Yes.
Because your wife is not non-U.S.
No.
Yeah.
When all of her money is at risk, or my husband's was all at risk.
Yeah.
Well, understand also that the Internal Revenue Code actually treats marriages between a U.S. citizen and a non-citizen very, very differently. In some cases, it's more punitive, absolutely. But I mean, there are advantages to having a non-U.S. citizen spouse, particularly when it comes to renouncing U.S. citizenship, because it is a way to move assets, outside the jurisdiction of
Or
the IRS.
bring assets in. It could be both ways, don't they?
Well, not if you're renounced.
It's not good if you're a U.S. person to have assets.
It's just a really
So,
bad
so,
idea.
so, in the other hand, discrimination is not really ended when it comes to the IRS. Still, there is aliens and us.
Everyone.
I mean, it reminds.
There's U.S. persons and aliens.
Aliens.
That's how it works.
It reminds me of that
Star Trek.
I read somewhere about the great debate in 1850s or something with Abraham Lincoln when he was talking about the blacks and the slavery and all of that, and he vividly said that white should not get married with the blacks.
People still say stuff like that.
No. What I'm saying is, after almost 200 years later,
Go to the South.
IRS remained his position to be, it is us and it is them.
That's an American
Well,
point of view.
absolutely, but understand the reason for that, okay?
Money.
No, because it doesn't always result in money at all. The reason is that, and it gives me no pleasure to say this, but the U.S. tax code is premised on the idea that U.S. citizens are property of the United States. Okay?
Branding the
Yeah.
cattle.
And remember, the United States does have estate and gift taxes, right? So the problem becomes, I mean, what if a U.S. person were, for example, to give away assets to a non-U.S. person? The U.S. would not have the ability to tax that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I think, undeniably part of the reason, for this discriminatory treatment. I mean, on the most basic level, if a U.S. citizen is married to a U.S. citizen, transfers of property and go back.
But still,
and
it
forth.
stays
No.
in the
the US.
property.
Right, but
In their
okay,
coffers.
if a U.S. citizen is married to an alien, okay, then there isn't the unlimited marital deduction at all, which makes it very difficult to move money around, which also, by the way, causes significant problems on divorce. That is, if in fact,
Yes, I
US
have to
citizens
choose
are
between
obeying
my
the law.
spouse or my money.
I don't know about that so much. I mean, just if anybody's listening to this, or if you're an American citizen who's tax compliant, who's thinking of getting a divorce, maybe you should see the tax consequences before getting the divorce. Who knows? Maybe it's better to not for that reason alone. I don't know.
Could be, for sure.
But the point
Even
is,
if you have a miserable marriage.
Just live separately.
well, there are everything. I mean, Bob, basically, there are tax consequences to every single thing in America. Everything. All right. And really, it's funny. I mean, patriotic Americans talk about the Constitution of the United States. Really, what they should be talking about is the Internal Revenue Code, because that's what they're supposed to live by, right?
By
Yeah.
the way, internal revenue, is it mentioned anywhere in any amendment of the Constitution at all?
The code itself.
No, the right to collect tax by the
It's
state.
an amendment to
16th.
the
16?
16th Amendment.
Yeah, okay. I didn't know that.
There's no question that
Yeah.
taxation is
Yeah.
legal in the United States.
Yeah,
No,
you
no,
can't get around
well,
that.
it is legal.
But aspects of it, in my view, as applied to Americans abroad, do violate, all right, parts of the Constitution, etc.
And
I mean, clearly, and this is absolutely indisputable, it has reached the point where Americans abroad are feeling forced to renounce U.S. citizenship for these reasons. Forced. If you were to look at, for example, the booklet that Trish put together of the 200 pages of, I mean, there's no doubt about it that they're feeling forced to renounce citizenship. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to people born in the United States and naturalized. So that means that Congress cannot take somebody's citizenship, either directly or I would argue indirectly, by simply making the conditions of citizenship so oppressive as they have now become for Americans abroad that they're forced to renounce.
Between putting a citizen between the stone and the hard rock.
Well,
and hard place.
they're putting citizens.
You have between 16th Amendment and 14th Amendment. Okay, well.
Well, and I'd like to ask you a question here. So, if you're a tax-compliant American abroad filing your taxes, and you're so frightened that you can't sleep at night, and for that reason you want to renounce your citizenship, okay, would you say that that would be the laws and policies of the U.S. government essentially taking somebody's citizenship?
Of course, this is a form of coercion.
Yeah, in other
Yeah.
words,
Yeah.
it's sort of like, you know, that great scene from The Godfather?
Which
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
yeah. Oh, yes.
It has reached that point.
Yeah, the lawyer you're talking about.
No. Remember,
When-
lawyers, we're not lawyers. What's that other great line? We're not
We're
lawyers,
reasonable
we're
people.
reasonable people. Yes.
We're not murderers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're reasonable people.
There is another question here. I try to you made it like a short list. How does citizenship-based taxation represent discrimination and relatively harsher compliance and harsher penalties for U.S. persons residents overseas compared to people living in the U.S.?
Oh, well, the ridiculous information reporting is number one reason that makes life difficult for all of us. Like John was mentioning, if you have a Canadian-controlled private corporation, and you know, especially if some of the information meetings we've had where all of a sudden somebody comes up and says, wow, you know, I left the United States when I was 3 weeks old and I'm a doctor. And those people are looking at losing their practice in fees just because they haven't filed form number 5471, which is impossible to understand. It's long, it's a tax return in itself. If you don't do these things, the automatic fee is $10,000 for every form, for every year, and all this sort of thing. I mean, those information reporting requirements do not exist for Americans.
Inside the United
No.
States.
Of
So-
course
No,
not.
so if you're in a, so for example, I use the bank about a block away from my house. Okay, and by the way, I live in Toronto, Canada, therefore I live offshore,
Mhm.
and therefore my bank is offshore. Now, if I don't report these things, then, you know, I'm subject to all kinds of hassles and penalties. My brother lives in the United States. He also uses a bank account 1 block away. He doesn't have to report these things. The problem, Bauman, is the U.S. deep distrust of anything that's foreign. I think partly just culturally, but also because, you know, of a sense that, you know, they have no supervisory jurisdiction over anything foreign. The answer to the discrimination question really should be answered like this. You go back to 17th century France, where, yeah, you know, the law in its wisdom prohibited both the rich and the poor from sleeping on the park bench, right? Of course, it's only the poor who need it.
And the rich who could get
report-
away
the
with it.
reporting
Yeah.
requirements, the reporting requirements really, in effect, only apply to Americans abroad. That's the point here.
Yeah.
And
you mentioned,
go ahead.
in Canada, we have a national sales tax, right?
Yes.
So a few years
GST.
ago, I bought a car. You know, it's a Monoscar RAV4, and I paid over $5,000 in federal and provincial taxes.
For the car.
Now, when I went to do my U.S. income taxes, I was looking for the line where I could add that to the foreign tax credit. But when I did that, I found out that you can't claim this at all because
That part is
it is-
foreigner.
No, it's because
it's not in the income taxes. You can only claim income taxes. Now, the thing is that the federal GST and the provincial HST, the provincial tax HST, it goes for government services, the same kinds of services that Americans
course,
receive
of course.
in the United States. And so it is part of the reason why we have in Canada certain other kinds of tax breaks, which are considered favorable to us. So, for example, your primary residence, if you sell that, there's no capital gains tax on it. But as soon as you sell it and you're an American citizen, if your capital gains goes above $250,000 then
Yes, tax
now
on
you
it.
have to pay taxes in the United States on it.
Like the
So-
mayor of the London.
Yeah.
you
Yeah, and
just
that's where
mentioned,
they're
yeah.
just
So
sucking
here in
it.
Canada, we don't get credit for the taxes we pay, and we have to pay taxes
So
on things that.
it's very selective for them.
Well, you know what's interesting about it is, I mean, it's interesting to hear you talk about that, Peter. You make an excellent
That's
point.
really a good strong point.
But see, the foreign tax credit works only. It would have to be an income tax credit against an income tax. In other words, the United States is essentially saying, if we don't have that kind of tax, then it's not a tax,
You're not
right? I mean,
paying
that that's not now. This is the
So
ultimate.
practically telling to the foreign countries what kind of the tax you have to follow them.
Well,
I mean,
I
the
wouldn't go
cities,
quite that far, but
yeah.
just simply saying that if you're, basically what it is, okay, is another example of if you're a U.S. citizen outside the United States, you're required to live as a homelander, basically.
Okay. And if
okay?
you don't have it, you don't write it
Well,
down.
it
If you have
doesn't
it, you have
exist.
to
But
do it.
you have to understand why I became so upset about this. I mean, here I was, what's the name of that place in BC that determines what your tax freedom day is? In Canada, your tax freedom day is sometime in June. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
that
taxes
kind
in
of-
Canada. Did you know, Bob, and the taxes in Canada are high?
Did you know that? So that a Canadian who makes
Ask my creditors.
who makes a certain
I know
amount
too.
of money will spend half of their year paying taxes, and then after that, the Canadian government, the provincial governments, the
They
municipal
get their
governments
share.
let you work for yourself, so that you can
The
have
government-
food on your table, and you can pay your housing and your clothing and everything else.
Well, so much
Okay.
for abolishment
So
of
actually,
slavery.
here we are paying over half of everything we make to the government, and the United States comes along and says, "Well, that's
is
not,
there anything
that's
left?"
not a
Yeah, right.
tax at GST. That's not a tax."
But what
Yeah.
about the United States taxing, for example, Canadian government contributions to registered
the
disability savings plans?
Or the RESP, same thing.
RESP is for the education, isn't
That's
it?
right, but those two plans,
They
Don't show up in
okay,
the
no, hold on, Bon. Okay, now you look like you can't believe what's
No,
happening.
no,
here.
I can't believe, but I don't understand.
Put
the lo-
yourself
I
in the
can't believe. I
mindset
can't
of the
believe
United States.
I can't believe the logic behind that.
The logic is simple.
You give $100 a month for a kid to get to the age of 18, so he or she can afford to go to the first year of college. That's it.
It is not under U.S. law. It is
don't?
not.
Oh,
under
because we
U-
don't have RESP,
We-
therefore you are
you
not
do
allowed
not
to
have-
have.
Exactly.
Take our
Exactly.
RRSP.
there you go.
In 2010, I was doing my taxes, or in 2011, I was doing my 2010 taxes. And here I was trying to find the line in the 1040 NR that allows me to claim my RRSP contributions. And you know what?
They don't have it.
I couldn't find it.
No.
They have
'Cause it's
K
not
for-
there.
They
It's
have
not
what is
there.
that? They have K for
So
7 or
401.
401.
Here's the thing.
Yeah.
If you make an RRSP contribution, you will not be taxed on that in Canada.
But you.
But you may have to claim that income anyway and then be taxed
Even
for
though
it
if
in the
you-
United States.
Even though
Well-
if you haven't withdrawn yet.
That's
No,
correct.
you
You don't
can-
have to receive the income to be
Un-
taxed. That's
under
one
the-
of the problems.
So,
No,
so
I'm-
it is like a corporate dividend that you could have. If you don't receive it, still you have to
as
claim
far
it.
as the
It's-
United
it's-
States
it-
is concerned, you have to say that you received it.
It's not a tax deferment vehicle until the money's in the plan. The United States recognizes RRSPs according to the Canadian U.S. Tax Convention.
That's the
the
only
treaty.
one, though.
But it's only the growth inside the plan. The
Right. Not, in
contributions
other
to
words,
the plan
are not deductible.
Are
Yeah.
not deductible from your income.
No, I
taxes.
understand that. But even in Canada, RRSP is not. You don't claim RRSP as part of income until you withdraw
That's right.
the money out of the bank. As
Right.
long as it's sitting in the
Well,
bank, it's not something
okay.
that you can.
Now here's the thing,
you pay
Bob.
tax
If you're
on.
a United States person living in Canada, you can put the money into the plan. Okay?
It did not counted.
And the United States will not allow you to deduct the contributions. But then when you take the money out of the plan,
Then
you
they
have to
could-
pay taxes
yes,
again.
Yes, they consider
Yeah,
the
but
whole
it's
thing.
even worse than that. If on your TFSA, and like John mentioned, the other two plans, if you know, and you would hope that you've invested this money in something and you're going to get something from it, right? So you have to show it as if you got it, because we don't get, there is no foreign tax credit because we're not paying tax, right? So we don't get a credit for it. They require you as if you had received it when you in fact have not. And it gets worse with mutual funds. I can't even begin to.
Yeah, you
Well,
say so.
Can,
if
can
you-
can I say two things just
Yeah,
for the
sure.
benefit of everybody watching this? Okay, the first point I want to make is there's a myth out there, and as we know, the opposite of the truth is not the lie; it's the myth. Okay.
Mhm.
But there's a myth out there that U.S. citizens abroad don't end up owing U.S. taxes. That is absolute garbage. Okay, that is absolute garbage. If a U.S. citizen abroad does anything, makes investments in any other than the following three ways, here's the restrictions. So step one, are you a U.S. person? If the answer is yes, there's only three things that you can do that don't involve punitive taxes or reporting requirements that are expensive, that are even worse than the taxes. One, interest in a bank account. Two, you can buy individual shares of a company. Okay, not mutual funds, but
Just
individual
shares,
shares.
stocks.
Three, okay, you can buy rental real estate. Anything beyond that creates very, very significant problems. Now, Trish brought up the thing about the mutual funds, okay? Extremely dangerous until this whole thing is resolved, if it's ever resolved, for a U.S. person abroad to invest in a mutual fund that is not a U.S. mutual fund. Okay, so
Okay.
they're
Not
There-
even mixture of them.
Oh God.
no.
No.
Okay,
Mhm.
you want to avoid that sort of stuff, and unless I'm not even going to give the exception. Okay,
Yeah.
you want to avoid that sort of stuff, or you are heading for a situation where you will both, in all likelihood, end up paying taxes over and above to the United States, over and above what you pay to your country of residence. But two, the compliance costs on these things, the forms and the professional fees, are simply unbelievable. It is not uncommon for Americans abroad to have U.S. tax returns that exceed 100 pages, that can cost upwards of $5,000. Not for everybody, okay, but once you start moving, beyond a very, very basic job sort of thing. This is a very, very serious problem. And add to that the fear of, you can't even get the same answer from two or three different
Yeah,
tax
exactly.
preparers or
So
accountants,
if
fear of
someone by
penalties.
mistake, or not by mistake, but unknowingly, invests $5,000 or $10,000 in a mutual fund that is non-United States, that person could easily not only lose that 10,000, but something beyond that,
Correct.
just to comply with
Absolutely.
Correct.
If you were to hold that sort of investment for 20 years or so, these things are, under the U.S. law, are called passive, or thought to be, okay, although there's nothing in the Internal Revenue Code specifically says a mutual fund is a passive foreign investment company. But they are thought to be passive foreign investment companies, and if that's the case, Warren Buffett says buy and hold. Well, that's not so if you're a U.S. person abroad, because the longer you hold, the more likely you're going to be penalized, and you're probably into close to 100% tax after 20 years. And that's in addition to the significant compliance costs along the way. I mean, this stuff, the problem here, what people need to understand is anybody can be a U.S. citizen abroad if you're not U.S. tax compliant, not filing the taxes. The problems begin where you attempt compliance with the U.S. law really can't be done.
Not to mention the amount of the cash flow you have to have in hand if
To
your
deal
money
with
if
it.
your money is locked down somewhere in your mutual fund.
Think of
or
it.
GIC
Think
or
of it.
whatever.
$5,000 a year, okay, to file a U.S. tax return. Trish brought up this 5471 for these small businesses. Let me tell you something about a 5471. It is more comprehensive than the same corporate tax return you file with Canada Revenue Agency in Canada for this company. It is not a form. It should not be called a form. It should be called what it is. A separate corporate tax return, okay, for somebody who happens to own a non-U.S. corporation.
Let me ask, because we are getting close. Are we getting close to the end
Yeah,
of the
10.
Yeah.
Want to keep going?
Maybe let's keep going because I wanted every answer, every question to be answered. I want to ask three of you just very a little bit kind of a different a question from different angle. Is type of administration in the United States makes any difference when this type of the law comes to surface? For instance, this FATCA came what 2010, 2009, I thought 2010. So it was in Obama administration.
Mm-hmm.
If we had Republican in the White House, is it possible that we would have the same law?
I think that if we did not have the current Democratic administration, I think it's entirely possible that things would be very, very different for Americans abroad today. There is absolutely no doubt that the current Democratic administration, specifically the Obama administration, has been very, very aggressive in A, trying to enforce taxation on Americans abroad, and B, trying to impose FATCA on the world. Okay, and that's just the simple fact of the matter. Okay, would another administration have been different? I think quite possibly. The problem here is the law is a problem, okay, but the enforcement is also a problem. But make no mistake about it. I mean, this law was the creation of this administration. You can go back to that wonderful video of President Obama in 2009, where he's there with Secretary Geithner and Commissioner Schulman, essentially announcing his war on anything offshore.
TurboTax
wasn't
Timmy.
he Goldman Sachs?
Well, he was that, but he was also somebody who was having problems filing his own U.S. taxes properly.
TurboTax Timmy.
I mean, whenever I talk, when I open my mouth with in my personal debates with a couple of people, when I bring the issue of the implementation of this financial or Wall Street people in the administration since practically 1976, Jimmy Carter, at the time of Jimmy Carter by Brzezinski, and the influence of the people like Rockefeller and the Trilateral Commission, they say, oh, you are talking about conspiracy theories, like a conspiracy theories or something like that. Isn't it the fact that in the last 30 or 40 years we had more people from Wall Street in the administration who tries to drain money as much as possible from the either public or from the government resources?
You know what? I don't really believe in conspiracy theories, but I do believe in the inability of the U.S. government to see clearly.
To what?
I do believe in the inability of the U.S. government to see clearly and see the
to see clearly,
consequences of what they're doing.
But again, the manner in which and I'm going back to the beginning of the show, the manner in which the United States government has gone about going after expats has been at the same time that they give the bankers a pass. You know, people like
Jamie.
What's that guy? The former governor of New Jersey, who was part of the MF
John
Global.
Corzine?
John Corzine. He stole $2 billion worth of segregated funds belonging to the clients of MF Global and bet them on the market and lost the bet. He lost all of their money. And where is this guy? Is he in jail? He's not in jail.
The U.S. government extended sort of a professional courtesy tone.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, the poor little expats, you know,
who earn all of his or her money outside of the United States.
Have worked all their lives and have their retirement money and their houses, and you know, this is the people that the government goes after. And why? Because it has to look like it's doing something, because it's not going after the real crooks.
You know, that is part of it. But let's if we're going to get into this, let's include the role of the tax compliance community in this as well, though, right? You know, this sort of, you know, wow, you got to obey these rules, you got to pay us all this money, etc. And the media, right? You know, it's sort of, I mean, I think, Peter, you've been particularly, I think, clear-sighted on this. I mean, normally you are anyway, but I think this is particularly the case.
This is your specialty.
Well, I know. I mean, I think that very early on, that you I think better than most people, understood that there was more than the U.S. government going on here. There was the U.S. government. There was clearly the media, right, which was complicit in, sending all these ridiculous stories around the world and, creating the idea, planting the idea that somehow all U.S. citizens abroad were tax cheats. And then, of course, you've got the whole accounting and legal profession.
And you know why the media did it. Because who pays their bills? The big firms like KPMG.
Well,
they're the big
I
advertisers.
think
They're the big advertisers.
I think it's partly that, Peter. But I think that in fairness, okay, part of it is, the stuff's so complicated, the media can't understand. So who do they call? They call KPMG,
Yeah.
Deloitte,
right?
or
Yeah,
KPMG.
sure.
Well, we do the same thing here.
Well, it was going on.
I mean,
here,
we're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
about
yeah.
Canadian
No, no,
city.
no. I'm saying in general, it has always been double standard when it comes to the government's function.
Yeah, but the problem is with the media and the compliance industry, they don't even report the stuff accurately. We saw a report yesterday, full of errors after.
Yeah.
I mean, unreal errors. Would scare the daylights out of people, saying stuff like, if you had an American parent, you were an American citizen.
Actually,
that's not really true.
Yeah,
It
on that
depends.
point,
Well, but
maybe
but
on
it-
that point, you can talk a bit about the whole issue of citizenship.
Well, I mean, the citizenship thing is huge, and this is another thing that the tax compliance industry is absolutely irresponsible about. They don't even bother to make sure, and there are many people in Canada who lost their citizenship decades ago by committing an expatriating act, which was to become a Canadian citizen.
Totally un-American,
Yeah, how dare you? The State Department didn't live up to their job and make this known that these people had to go through a process, supposedly. I don't believe it's actually in a law. But now the problem is those people don't have any documentation of the fact that they lost the citizenship. The compliance industry is saying, sorry,
we have your number and
we
name,
don't have
you
you
know,
don't
yeah.
have the CLN, the certificate
Yeah.
of loss of nationality. You're an American. People are buying this.
Yeah, basically, I mean, to keep it a very simple message, I think, would be this: if you're born in the United States, you start out life as a U.S. citizen, but it's quite possible to have lost it.
And you should
If you're
investigate
not
it.
born in the United States, you do not start out life as a U.S. citizen without proof of certain external facts, and those are your base starting
Okay,
points.
so
You must do
anyone
it.
before going and get one of these high-priced lawyer or accountants,
God.
that's better verify if he or she is a
Absolutely.
Well,
US
yeah, I
citizen.
mean, you can put it that way, but one of the problems with U.S. citizens, I mean, the tax laws are incomprehensible. The citizenship
Sorry.
laws are perhaps more they're at least as incomprehensible, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the era of the thing. And really, for a lot of people who are just shocked by this and couldn't have imagined that they would wake up one day facing this accusation, it's largely a question, I think, of defending themselves from the accusation of American citizenship. In other words, I don't think I'm American. I thought I lost my citizenship. Now I need to have the facts to defend myself from this. And this is particularly in Canada, right?
Yeah.
Because
it's
of
very
the porous
close,
border.
Right.
Okay,
close
this
border,
is a
yeah.
very, very significant problem. Now, I don't have a sense that this is as big of a problem in Europe, for example.
Yes.
And part of the reality of the situation in Canada is, I mean, there's all this, these crazy, I mean, we shouldn't even call it citizenship taxation, this crazy U.S. extraterritorial
Yeah.
application
Yeah,
where they're
this is-
claiming the right to tax residents and citizens of other countries. But in Canada, it's very much exacerbated by the fact that many of the people who are accused of being Americans do not accept and do not believe they're American citizens. I mean, at the end of the last show, you said you weren't sure if you were American based on our discussion.
No, based on your definition, because if someone else wants to define my entity
Well,
or my existence, therefore I am not
Well,
sure.
that's the thing. The point is that American citizenship is very clear at the margins. It's not as clear sort of inside, when you get, these people who, I mean, there's a lot of draft dodgers in Canada who came to Canada and became Canadian citizens in the 70s or late 60s. And many of those people are now being told by tax compliance firms,
Nobody
lawyers,
went
that,
after Clinton.
that they're saying,
George
hey,
W.
you're an
Bush.
American citizen, and that is not necessarily true.
No, but it is a problem. And some of these people, we have one woman, one of our submissions, a video where, and unfortunately, she does live in a very small town, and I don't think you could expect these sort of lawyers and accountants necessarily to be aware. But they told her, well, you know, you're a U.S. citizen. And these people went and filed tax returns and went through the expatriation.
And then they opened that can of worm, and they
Of
will get
course.
to the.
And they were not, clearly not American citizens.
We are getting close to, actually we passed our
Yeah.
time, but I mean the issue is so enormous that I'm pretty sure if tax experts, they cannot manage their own laws, we can't possibly do it
Do it
in a
either.
Well,
year
it's
or so.
first a citizenship issue and then a tax issue. The
Yeah.
problem
Yeah.
with the tax people, and I'm not saying they're not good people, is that we do what we're trained to do, right? I mean, they deal with tax, right, which kind of assumes that you're a citizen,
Yes,
you know, or a U.S.
They are
person.
not there to verify your
Yeah. And also,
And the
the green
banks.
card situation is enormously complex as well. So if anybody is watching this who's a green card holder living outside the United States, you know, there are special rules, you know, that apply there, et cetera. I mean, it's an enormously complicated problem.
Now, before we leave, Peter, do you have anything that, any word of wisdom for your fellow expats
Well,
who either relinquish or non-relinquished that
I-
you think they should?
I can say this: I sleep well at night
Mhm.
because I'm not a U.S. citizen.
And by the way, it was last year was I heard that they increased the amount of the
Renunciation fee?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
The renunciation fee?
Yes,
Oh.
from 400 to 2,400.
450 to this is U.S. dollars.
Yeah.
2,350 U.S. dollars.
That's just a recognition.
So they realize there is a demand.
Yeah,
Also.
no, well, not only that, but
No,
they
they're
realize
trying-
there's significant value in not being an American citizen. I
Yeah.
predict the fee will go much higher.
So you have anything? Any word of
Get
some-
out. Get
Get
out
out.
before it gets
Get
even
out.
worse. And we were saying that 3 years ago, so
And it
it's
is
gotten
wor-
worse.
It's worse.
And John?
Well, I'm more neutral on these things,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I guess what I would say is that there are two kinds of Americans abroad with very serious problems. The first are those who are not U.S. tax compliant, and the second are those who are U.S.
Yes,
tax
tax
compliant.
So
maybe
it's-
Trish is right.
So it's catch-22. No matter what
Yeah.
end of the stick you are, still you are in the,
You are in
the
trouble.
problem. Thank you for first of all for all.
thank
It
you
was
for having us.
very interesting conversation as always. Thank you for you audience that joined us today. Here you saw the number of the expats from different walks of
No. We are Canadian citizens, Bob.
Yes.
Do not use
Okay.
it seriously. Don't use that word.
You witnessed
Are you an expat?
three Canadian citizens who were wrongly accused to be expats.
Thank you for that, Bob.
And
Thank you.
And even them themselves, they are not sure about their identity, whether or not they are American. So you saw all sorts of the different point of view, and all these three guests, they have extensive information and study and research in this field for the last 3 or 4 years. I hope you enjoy that and you benefit from that. And please remember, take part in your democratic process. Vote, become a volunteer, donate, help a candidate, and better, you yourself become a candidate. Good night.